A mate of mine swears this happened to his uncle just 3 years ago, somewhere between Broken Hill and Coober Pedy. The kind of story that makes you check your fuel gauge twice before heading into the red center. It was midnight on a Tuesday in March when Dave Henderson's headlights caught something that shouldn't have been there. He'd been driving the barrier highway for 18 hours straight, hauling machinery parts from Adelaide to Mount Isa. The road stretched endlessly ahead, nothing but scrubland and the occasional roadkill kangaroo breaking the monotony. That's when he saw them. 3 figures on horseback, silhouetted against the star-drunk sky. They sat perfectly still beside the road, as if they'd been waiting for hours. Dave rubbed his eyes, certain it was fatigue playing tricks on him. But when he looked again, they were still there. He slowed his truck to a crawl. The riders wore wide-brimmed hats and long coats that seemed to ripple in a wind he couldn't feel. One of them raised a gloved hand and pointed toward a dirt track that branched off to the left. "Shortcut to Wilcannia," the figure called out, his voice carrying impossibly clear across the distance. "Saves you 2 hours, mate." Dave knew every road in this part of New South Wales. There was no shortcut to Wilcannia from here. But something about the rider's tone was so confident, so certain, that he found himself considering it. The man looked familiar somehow, like someone from an old photograph. "Thanks, but I'll stick to the highway," Dave shouted back. The 3 riders exchanged glances. Without another word, they turned their horses and melted into the darkness, leaving no dust cloud, no hoofprints in the red earth. Dave didn't sleep well for weeks after that. But Dave's encounter isn't unique. Ask anyone who spent serious time on Australia's remote highways, and you'll hear similar stories. The ghostly bushrangers of the Outback, they call them. Phantom outlaws who appear to lost or weary travelers, always offering directions that lead nowhere good. The legend traces back to the gold rush era of the 1860s, when bushrangers like Ben Hall and Frank Gardner terrorized the roads between towns. These were desperate men who lived by their wits and their guns, robbing mail coaches and gold shipments. They knew every hidden track and secret waterhole in their territory. But here's where it gets interesting. According to local Aboriginal elders near Bourke, the spirits of these bushrangers never left. They're trapped in the places where they died, condemned to wander the roads they once ruled. Only now, instead of stealing gold, they steal something far more precious: your sense of direction. Sarah Mitchell learned this the hard way in 2019. She was driving from Darwin to Alice Springs for her sister's wedding, taking the scenic route through Tennant Creek. Somewhere near the Barkley Tablelands, her GPS died. No signal, no satellite connection, nothing. The sun was setting, painting the landscape in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if she wasn't completely lost. That's when she spotted the campfire. 2 men sat beside it, their horses grazing nearby. They wore clothes that seemed oddly formal for the middle of nowhere. Leather vests, pressed shirts, boots that gleamed despite the dust. One had a magnificent mustache that curled at the ends. "Evening, miss," the mustachioed man called out as Sarah approached. "Bit turned around, are we?" "You could say that," Sarah replied. "I'm trying to get to Alice Springs." The second man, younger with piercing blue eyes, pointed southeast. "Easy as pie. Follow that track there for about 20 kilometers, then turn right at the old windmill. You'll hit the Stewart Highway in no time." Sarah hesitated. The track looked barely used, more like a cattle path than a proper road. But these men seemed to know the area well, and she was desperate. "Are you sure? It looks pretty rough." "Trust me, love," the older man said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We've been traveling these roads longer than anyone." Something in his tone made Sarah's skin crawl, but she thanked them and headed back to her car. As she drove away, she glanced in her rearview mirror. The campfire was gone. The men were gone. Even the horses had vanished, leaving nothing but empty scrubland. Sarah followed their directions anyway. The track led her deeper into the wilderness, far from any main road. After an hour of driving, she realized there was no windmill, no turnoff, nothing but endless bush stretching in every direction. Her fuel gauge was dropping dangerously low. It took a search and rescue helicopter to find her 2 days later, parked beside a dried-up creek bed 60 kilometers from the nearest town. She was dehydrated but alive, clutching her phone with its dead battery. They seem so helpful, she told the rescue team. So normal. But Sarah's description of the two men matched historical accounts of the Kellaway brothers, bushrangers who were shot dead by police near that exact spot in 1874. The phenomenon isn't limited to car travelers either. Hikers, motorcyclists, even airplane pilots have reported encounters with these phantom guides. They always appear when someone is lost or vulnerable, always offer assistance that leads to greater danger. Professor Janet Thornton from the University of Sydney has studied these reports for over a decade. She's collected more than 300 documented cases, each following a similar pattern. The witnesses are always alone and in some form of distress, she explains. The figures they encounter match historical descriptions of known bushrangers, down to specific details about their clothing and mannerisms. But the directions they give invariably lead people further from safety. What makes these encounters particularly unsettling is their consistency across different time periods and locations. In 1987, a truckie named Bob Williams reported meeting a man on horseback near Charleville who directed him down a road that led to an abandoned mine shaft. In 2003, backpackers near Cobar were approached by riders who sent them toward what turned out to be a flash flood zone. The descriptions vary slightly, but certain elements remain constant. The figures always wear period clothing from the late 1800s. They're unfailingly polite and helpful. They know the local geography intimately, and they always disappear without a trace once they've given their deadly advice. Some researchers believe these encounters are manifestations of what psychologists call highway hypnosis, a trance-like state that can occur during long drives through monotonous terrain. The isolation and stress of being lost could trigger hallucinations based on cultural knowledge of bushranger history. But that theory doesn't explain the physical evidence. In 2015, geologist Mark Stevens was conducting mineral surveys near Broken Hill when he encountered 3 riders who directed him toward what they claimed was a shortcut to town. Mark was skeptical enough to photograph the encounter with his phone before following their directions. The photos show empty landscape. No riders, no horses, nothing. But the GPS data from his phone reveals something disturbing. The coordinates where he stopped match the site of a bushranger ambush from 1871, where 3 members of the Brady Gang were killed in a shootout with police. The shortcut the Phantom Riders recommended would have led Mark directly into an area of unstable mine shafts, some over 100 meters deep. Local Aboriginal communities have their own explanations for these encounters. According to Wiradjuri elder Tommy Williams, the spirits of violent men who died on country are sometimes trapped there, unable to move on. They're still trying to take what isn't theirs, he says. Back then it was gold and money, now it's lives. The most chilling aspect of these encounters might be their apparent intelligence. The phantom bushrangers don't give random directions. They seem to understand modern geography, knowing exactly which wrong turn will cause the most harm. They adapt their advice to current conditions, accounting for seasonal floods, road closures, even changes in mining operations. This suggests something more complex than simple residual haunting. These entities appear to be actively malevolent, using their knowledge of the land to lure people into danger. The question isn't whether these encounters are real. Too many credible witnesses have reported similar experiences for them to be dismissed entirely. The question is what these phantom bushrangers actually want, and why they're becoming more active. Roadside assistance companies across rural Australia report increasing numbers of calls from travelers who've been misdirected by helpful locals who then vanish. Police in remote areas are familiar with the pattern. Someone follows directions from mysterious strangers and ends up stranded in dangerous locations. Most disturbing of all are the cases where travelers are never found. Every year, dozens of people disappear in the Australian Outback. Their vehicles are sometimes discovered weeks later, parked in impossible locations miles from any recognized road. The occupants are never seen again. So, if you're ever driving alone through the Red Center and encounter helpful strangers who seem a little too knowledgeable about shortcuts and back roads, remember Dave Henderson's wisdom. Stick to the highway. Because in the vast emptiness of the Outback, the most dangerous thing you can encounter isn't snakes, spiders, or even mechanical breakdown. It's someone offering to help you find your way.